I would love your perspective on where you think AI is potentially going to help with removing or reducing any friction. Have you seen anything that you find interesting in this space, especially when it comes to AI and application of AI?
For sure. I think it's interesting because a couple of years ago, all of us were talking about blockchain. Then we were talking about 5G. Now we're talking about AI. What's interesting is there's a world where all of this lives, all of this technology innovation. One area that's fascinating to me is in the warehouse. So, in addition to talking about AI and robots, I pray to God that nobody had a Terminator style robot in a warehouse. Jokes aside, things like 5G. A couple years ago, I was asked about that. I said that in the warehouse, things like 5G can make things cleaner, crisper, faster, especially when we talk about the idea of subscription boxes or boxes with multiple items from around the warehouse. Same thing with AI. Can they make things like the pick process more efficient and cleaner, especially when there are multiple steps involved?
I definitely think so. Like, I think that's where inside the warehousing, decision-making logic around realities, right? So machine learning's always been around in optimizing things, so that nothing's new about that. Like, that aspect has always been there. But the ability to truly infer information in a very different way, like that's what LLMs kind of bring to the table, to say, rather than a supervisor, manager, general manager reading a report and actually making a decision, can this tooling actually look at the data, look at its output in a real human sense and go, okay, based on all of these 5 things, what's the logical next thing that I need to do? The nuances of machine learning and the effort that it takes to develop something of that nature versus what you can do now, I think there is a wild difference, right? And I think there is going to be a huge impact because of that. But I also feel like something as simple as like carrier decision making, the way we have been doing carrier decision making inside the warehouse, that has always been this logical step flow of like, if this, then that, if not this, then that, right? There has been really cool tech that takes into consideration other aspects like your spend and doing more predictive validation of, just because it's cheaper to make this decision right now, is it really good for me from a GRI standpoint or the total spend contractual commitments that I have against contractors? Now, all of that's available within the softwares that are out there today. I think where it gets interesting is the decision making being more rapidly evolving in real time, looking at GRI, but also looking at my warehouse volume to actually inform, well, maybe my operational impact right now of choosing this carrier is going to be much higher from how much volume I need to ship down a given lane. I should be looking at GRI, but I should switch it around for a few hours so that I can get my operations moving to meet the customer commitments. There is this nuanced aspect that goes into it as well. A lot of the paperwork, like the international shipping, identification of product, the HS code validations, all of that, I think it starts becoming easier and easier and easier and more accessible. Not that we have not had like computer vision technology that could recognize the product. One of the companies I used to work for 10 plus years ago, we used to have ML models that would do HS classification. I think it's going to get better and more democratized and accessible to brands that could not access capabilities like that. A dramatic change is bound to happen.
For sure. I think a couple things to riff from that point. When it comes to HS classification, historically, auto classification APIs, meaning you just put in the item description and it comes, gives you an HTS code, and then you get the duty and tax value, were horribly imprecise, not really because of the fault of the API itself, but because you can't fix intent of what somebody had in mind of why they're selling an item, what it's being used for, things like that. Whereas now with AI, we're seeing a much better, more accurate way of looking at it because AI can help with learning, number one, and intent, or at least learning that intent. So definitely we're seeing the auto classification APIs get better. certainly a lot of improvement there, though it'll never be perfect because I don't think an AI tool can truly grasp human intent, at least not today, at least not until the Terminator bots come.
They're coming. I think we're just around the corner, man.
One other thing I think it's important to bring up if we're talking about the idea of carriers and AI is a little more of that agentic AI shopping. I still think we're in the infancy, but we're starting to see that on one hand, you have people who will do Google searches, but sometimes the information you need is now too many sponsored ads. Whereas if you go into an agentic AI search and give more data and granularity around what you're shopping for, the intent, what it's being used for, you can get some pretty good answers. And we're still in the infancy, I think, a little bit on the idea of agentic AI and search and purchase decisions. But I do think it'll be interesting to see, maybe if we do this next year at this time, how much agentic AI will be used in carrier selection process, to your point about what we're using carriers for and why and when.